Thomas Johnson never imagined his life would turn out this way. Growing up in a small town in Alabama, he watched his grandfather wake up before sunrise every single day, walking out to tend the same 50 acres of land that had been in their family for 3 generations. Back then, those fields barely grew enough crops to put food on the table and pay the bills. As a young boy, Thomas would follow his grandfather around the farm, asking endless questions about why they planted corn in this section and soybeans in that corner. His grandfather, a wise man with weathered hands and kind eyes, would always take time to explain everything. He taught Thomas that farming wasn't just about throwing seeds in the ground and hoping for the best. It was about understanding the soil, reading the weather, and treating the land with respect. When Thomas turned 18, most of his friends headed off to college or moved to big cities looking for better opportunities. His own parents encouraged him to do the same. They had worked hard their whole lives and wanted something easier for their son. But Thomas felt different. Every time he walked through those fields, he could see something others couldn't. He saw potential. The first few years were incredibly tough. Thomas took over the farm when his grandfather passed away, and he quickly realized that traditional farming methods weren't going to cut it anymore. The big corporate farms were taking over, and small family operations like his were struggling to compete. Many nights Thomas sat at his kitchen table looking at bills he couldn't pay and wondering if he should just sell the land and find a regular job. But Thomas had an idea that kept him going. He had been reading about organic farming and sustainable agriculture practices. While other farmers were using more and more chemicals to grow their crops, Thomas decided to go in the opposite direction. He started learning about natural pest control, crop rotation techniques, and soil health management. His neighbors thought he was crazy. The transition wasn't easy. For the first 2 years, his crop yields were lower than before. Some seasons, he barely broke even. His wife, a school teacher named Patricia, worked extra hours to help support their family while Thomas experimented with his new farming methods. There were moments when even she wondered if they were making the right choice. But Thomas refused to give up. He spent his evenings reading farming journals, watching online videos, and connecting with other organic farmers across the country. He learned about companion planting, where certain crops help each other grow better when planted together. He discovered how to use beneficial insects to control harmful pests naturally. Most importantly, he learned how to build healthy soil that would produce better crops year after year. Slowly, things started to change. By his 3rd year of organic farming, Thomas noticed his soil was darker and richer than ever before. His crops were not only growing better, but they were also more resistant to diseases and pests. Local customers started seeking out his produce because it tasted better than anything they could buy at the grocery store. Thomas decided to take a big risk. He approached several local restaurants and offered to supply them with fresh, organic vegetables. The chefs were impressed with the quality and flavor of his produce. Word spread quickly through the local food scene, and soon Thomas had more orders than he could handle with just his original 50 acres. Using the profits from his restaurant contracts, Thomas bought another 100 acres from a neighboring farmer who was ready to retire. Then he bought another 200 acres the following year. Each new piece of land was converted to organic farming, using the methods he had perfected on his original farm. As his operation grew, Thomas started attracting attention from beyond his local area. Agricultural researchers from the state university came to study his farming techniques. They were amazed by how he had improved soil health and crop yields without using synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. Thomas was invited to speak at farming conferences, sharing his knowledge with other farmers who wanted to transition to sustainable methods. The real breakthrough came when a major grocery chain heard about Thomas's operation. They were looking for reliable suppliers of organic produce to meet growing customer demand. After visiting his farms and seeing his operation firsthand, they offered him a contract that would triple his current sales volume. Thomas knew this was the opportunity he had been working toward for years, but it also meant he needed to expand significantly. He purchased more land and invested in new equipment. He hired additional workers and trained them in his organic farming methods. What started as a small family farm was becoming a major agricultural operation. Within 5 years, Thomas was farming over 2,000 acres across 3 different counties. His company, Johnson Organic Farms, was supplying fresh produce to grocery stores in 5 states. He had developed innovative techniques for extending growing seasons and maximizing crop yields while maintaining organic certification. The success brought new challenges. Thomas found himself spending more time in boardrooms and less time in the fields he loved. He was constantly traveling to meet with buyers, attend trade shows, and oversee operations at his various farm locations. The drive between his different properties was taking up more and more of his time. Patricia suggested he should consider buying a private plane. At first, Thomas laughed at the idea. A farm kid from Alabama owning his own airplane seemed impossible. But as he calculated the time he was spending on the road and the business opportunities he was missing because of travel limitations, the idea started to make sense. Thomas did his research carefully. He looked at different aircraft options, compared costs, and even took flying lessons to get his pilot's license. He discovered that owning a private jet would actually save him money in the long run by allowing him to be more efficient with his time and reach more customers. After months of consideration and financial planning, Thomas made his decision. He had worked hard, built a successful business, and earned the right to make this investment. He had saved enough money to buy a quality aircraft outright, without taking on any debt that might put his farming operation at risk. Thomas felt proud of how far he had come, from a struggling young farmer who could barely pay his bills to a successful business owner ready to purchase a private jet. His journey represented years of hard work, smart decisions, and never giving up on his dreams. He thought back to those early mornings with his grandfather, walking through the same fields that had now grown into a multi-million-dollar operation. His grandfather would have been amazed to see what those original 50 acres had become. Thomas was ready to take the next step in his journey, confident that he had earned his place among the most successful farmers in the country. What Thomas didn't know was that his next chapter would test him in ways he never expected, challenging not just his business skills but his dignity and strength as a human being. Thomas woke up early that Tuesday morning, just like he had every day for the past 20 years. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon as he walked through his newest farm property, checking on the tomato plants that would be ready for harvest in just a few weeks. The morning dew made everything look fresh and clean, and Thomas felt good about the day ahead. He had an important appointment at Premium Aircraft Sales at 2 o'clock that afternoon. After months of research and planning, today was the day he would finally purchase his private jet. Thomas had already spoken with the sales team over the phone several times, and everything seemed to be in order. He had his bank statements ready, his financing pre-approved, and a cashier's check for the down payment sitting in his briefcase. Thomas finished his morning farm inspection and headed home to clean up. But as he was getting ready to change clothes, he got an urgent phone call from his farm manager. There was a problem with one of the irrigation systems at the South Farm, and water was flooding into areas where it shouldn't be. Thomas knew he had to handle this immediately, or he could lose thousands of dollars worth of crops. He grabbed his work boots and headed straight to the farm. The problem was worse than he thought. A main pipe had burst during the night, and water was everywhere. Thomas spent the next 3 hours working alongside his crew, digging in the mud and fixing pipes. By the time they got everything under control, Thomas was covered in dirt and mud from head to toe. Looking at his watch, Thomas realized he only had 30 minutes to get to his appointment at the aircraft dealership. He was already running late, and the drive would take at least 25 minutes. There wasn't time to go home and change clothes. Thomas made a quick decision. He washed his hands and face at the farm's utility sink, brushed off as much dirt as he could from his work clothes, and headed straight to Premium Aircraft Sales. As Thomas pulled into the parking lot of the dealership, he noticed how fancy everything looked. The building was made of glass and steel, with perfectly manicured landscaping and expensive cars parked out front. Thomas felt a little out of place in his muddy work boots and dirt-stained shirt, but he reminded himself that he had every right to be there. He was a successful businessman with money to spend, just like anyone else. Walking through the front doors, Thomas was amazed by what he saw inside. The showroom was enormous, with gleaming white aircraft displayed like pieces of art. The floors were polished marble and everything was spotlessly clean. Well-dressed salespeople were showing different planes to customers who looked like they belonged in this expensive world. Thomas approached the reception desk, where a young woman in a crisp business suit was typing on her computer. When she looked up and saw him, her friendly smile immediately disappeared. She looked him up and down, taking in his dirty work clothes and muddy boots, and her expression changed to one of obvious disapproval. "Can I help you?" she asked in a cold tone that made it clear she didn't think he belonged there. "Yes, I have an appointment at 2 o'clock to look at the Citation jet," Thomas said politely. "My name is Thomas Johnson." The receptionist looked confused and checked her computer screen. "I don't see any appointment under that name," she said, even though Thomas was certain he had confirmed the appointment just 2 days earlier. Thomas remained calm and pulled out his phone to show her the email confirmation. The receptionist barely glanced at it before saying, "Well, I'll need to check with someone. Please wait over there," and pointed to a small seating area in the corner, away from the main showroom. As Thomas walked to the waiting area, he noticed that other customers were being greeted warmly and immediately escorted to look at different aircraft. A man in an expensive suit had just walked in after Thomas, and 3 salespeople rushed over to help him. No one seemed interested in helping Thomas at all. After waiting for nearly 20 minutes, a tall man in his 50s approached Thomas. His name tag read, Robert Sterling, Senior Sales Manager. Sterling looked at Thomas with barely concealed disgust, clearly unhappy about having to deal with him. "So, you're interested in looking at aircraft?" Sterling asked in a mocking tone. "Do you have any idea how much these planes cost?" Thomas kept his voice steady and professional. "Yes, I've done my research. I'm interested in the Citation model. We discussed on the phone. I'm prepared to make a purchase today." Sterling laughed loudly, attracting attention from other people in the showroom. "Listen, friend, I think you might be in the wrong place. These aren't toys we're selling here. The plane you're talking about costs over $2 million. Maybe you should try the used car lot down the street." Thomas felt his face getting hot with embarrassment, but he refused to let Sterling intimidate him. "I understand the price, and I'm prepared to pay for it. I have my financing documents and bank statements right here." "Bank statements?" Sterling said, raising his voice even more. "You think you can just walk in here with some papers and buy a jet? Do you even know what maintenance costs on these things? Do you have a pilot's license? Do you understand what insurance costs?" Other customers and sales staff had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. Thomas could hear people whispering and laughing. He felt humiliated but tried to maintain his dignity. "I have my pilot's license and I've researched all the operating costs," Thomas replied firmly. "I'm a serious buyer, and I'd appreciate being treated with the same respect you show your other customers." Sterling's face turned red with anger. "Respect? You walk in here looking like you just crawled out of a ditch and you want respect? I've been selling aircraft for 20 years and I can spot a time waster from a mile away. You're clearly not our type of customer." Thomas couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had never been treated this way in his entire life. "What exactly do you mean by your type of customer?" he asked. "I mean someone who can actually afford what we're selling," Sterling shot back. "Someone who belongs in a place like this. Look around you. Do you see anyone else dressed like they just finished working in the fields?" The humiliation was almost unbearable, but Thomas refused to give up. He opened his briefcase and pulled out his bank statements, hoping to prove that he was a legitimate buyer. "Here are my financial documents. You can see that I have more than enough money to purchase this aircraft." Sterling barely glanced at the papers before handing them back. "Anyone can fake documents these days. How do I know these are real? How do I know you didn't just print these off your home computer?" At this point, Thomas realized that nothing he said or showed would change Sterling's mind. The man had decided from the moment he saw Thomas that he didn't belong there, and no amount of proof would convince him otherwise. "I demand to speak to your manager," Thomas said, trying one last time to get fair treatment. "I am the manager," Sterling replied with a cruel smile, "and I'm telling you that we don't have anything here for you." "I think it's time for you to leave." Sterling then called over two security guards who had been watching the whole situation. "Gentlemen, please escort this man out of the building. He's disrupting our business." Thomas couldn't believe this was happening. He was being thrown out of a business where he had come to spend over $2 million simply because of how he looked and the color of his skin. As the security guards approached him, Thomas knew he had no choice but to leave. Walking back to his truck, Thomas felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. In all his years of building his business and working with people from all walks of life, he had never experienced such blatant discrimination. He sat in his truck for several minutes trying to process what had just happened and decide what to do next. Thomas sat in his truck outside premium aircraft sales for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure anger and disbelief. In his 45 years of life, he had faced challenges and setbacks, but nothing had prepared him for the humiliation he just experienced. The drive home felt longer than usual. Thomas kept replaying the scene in his mind, thinking about all the things he should have said or done differently. But deep down, he knew that nothing would have changed Robert Sterling's mind. The man had made his decision the moment Thomas walked through those doors. When Thomas pulled into his driveway, his wife Patricia was waiting on the front porch. She had been excited about his appointment and was expecting to hear good news about their new airplane. One look at Thomas's face told her that something had gone terribly wrong. "What happened?" Patricia asked as Thomas walked up the steps, his shoulders slumped with defeat. Thomas sat down on the porch swing next to his wife and told her everything. He described how he had been treated from the moment he walked in, the way the receptionist looked at him, and every cruel word that came out of Sterling's mouth. As he spoke, Patricia's expression changed from concern to shock to pure rage. "They did what?" Patricia said, standing up so quickly that the porch swing rocked wildly. "They actually had security escort you out? For trying to buy a plane with your own money?" Thomas nodded, still feeling the sting of humiliation. Patricia paced back and forth on the porch, her mind racing. As a high school principal, she had dealt with discrimination and unfair treatment before, but nothing like this. She knew they couldn't let this slide. "We're not going to let them get away with this," Patricia said firmly. "What they did was wrong, and it was illegal. You have rights, Thomas." That evening, Patricia called her brother David, who worked as a civil rights lawyer in Atlanta. David listened carefully as Patricia described what had happened to Thomas. Even though he had handled many discrimination cases over the years, he was shocked by the blatant nature of the treatment Thomas had received. "This is a clear case of discrimination," David told them over the phone. The way they treated Thomas compared to other customers, the comments about him not being their type of customer, and the fact that they refused to even look at his financial documents, it's textbook discrimination. David advised Thomas to write down everything he could remember about the incident while it was still fresh in his memory. He also suggested that Thomas check if he had recorded any part of the encounter on his phone. Thomas suddenly remembered that he had been recording a voice memo for his farm manager about the irrigation repair when he walked into the dealership. He had forgotten to stop the recording. With nervous fingers, Thomas played back the audio file on his phone. There it was, Sterling's voice clear as day, making those awful comments about Thomas not being their type of customer and suggesting he should go to a used car lot instead. The recording also captured the laughter from other people in the showroom, and Sterling's refusal to take Thomas's financial documents seriously. "This is perfect," David said when they played him the recording over the phone. "This is exactly the kind of evidence we need." Sterling made his discriminatory intent crystal clear. The next morning, Thomas felt different. Instead of staying home feeling sorry for himself, he decided to take action. He started by filing a complaint with the Better Business Bureau and the state's Civil Rights Commission. He also reached out to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, who immediately expressed interest in his case. Patricia suggested they share Thomas's story on social media. At first, Thomas was hesitant. He had always been a private person who preferred to handle problems quietly. But Patricia convinced him that staying silent would only allow Sterling and others like him to continue treating people this way. Thomas wrote a simple post on Facebook, describing what had happened at premium aircraft sales. He included a photo of himself at his farm and mentioned that he was a successful organic farmer who had been discriminated against while trying to make a major purchase. He didn't include the audio recording yet. David had advised him to save that for later. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Thomas's post had been shared hundreds of times. Comments poured in from people expressing outrage and sharing their own stories of discrimination. Local news reporters began reaching out, asking if Thomas would be willing to tell his story on television. Other successful black business owners started contacting Thomas directly. A restaurant owner from Birmingham shared how he had been treated poorly when trying to buy an expensive car. A tech entrepreneur from Nashville described being followed around in high-end stores. A doctor from Memphis told Thomas about being questioned and searched at a private airport, even though he owned his own plane. Thomas realized he wasn't alone. This wasn't just about him, or even just about premium aircraft sales. It was about a pattern of discrimination that successful black people faced all across the country, often in situations where they should have been welcomed as valued customers. The story gained more attention when a popular blogger wrote about Thomas's experience. The blog post was titled, "Farmer with Millions Can't Buy a Plane Because of How He Looks." The post went viral, being shared thousands of times across different social media platforms. Local television news stations started calling. Thomas was nervous about going on camera, but Patricia encouraged him to speak out. "If you don't tell your story, who will?" she asked. "How many other people are going through the same thing but staying quiet about it?" Thomas agreed to do his first television interview with Channel 7 News. The reporter, Janet Williams, came to his farm and filmed Thomas walking through his fields, showing the success he had built from nothing. The contrast was powerful. Here was a man who had created jobs, fed communities, and built a multi-million-dollar business, yet he couldn't get basic respect at an airplane dealership. During the interview, Thomas remained calm and dignified. He didn't attack Sterling personally or call for boycotts. He simply told his story and expressed hope that sharing it would prevent others from going through the same experience. "I worked hard my whole life," Thomas said, looking directly into the camera. "I built this business from 50 acres to over 2,000 acres. I employed dozens of people and feed thousands of families. All I wanted was to be treated with the same respect as any other customer." The interview aired that evening and was immediately picked up by other news stations. By the next morning, Thomas's story was being discussed on national news programs and radio shows across the country. Premium aircraft sales tried to control the damage by releasing a statement saying they were investigating the incident and that Sterling's behavior did not reflect company values. But it was too little, too late. The story had taken on a life of its own. Thomas received calls from aircraft dealers in other cities, apologizing for how he had been treated and inviting him to visit their showrooms. Several offered him special deals and promised red carpet treatment. While Thomas appreciated the offers, he wasn't ready to make another attempt at buying a plane just yet. The most meaningful response came from other farmers, both black and white, who reached out to support Thomas. Many shared their own stories of being judged based on their appearance rather than their success. Thomas realized that his willingness to speak out had opened up conversations that needed to happen. As Thomas sat on his porch that evening, watching the sunset over his fields, he felt something he hadn't expected: hope. Yes, he had been humiliated and discriminated against, but his story was now helping other people feel less alone in their own struggles. Sometimes, Thomas thought, the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight. 3 weeks after Thomas's television interview aired, investigative reporter Janet Williams called him with news that would change everything. She had been digging deeper into premium aircraft sales, and what she found was much worse than anyone had imagined. "Thomas, you need to sit down for this," Janet said over the phone. "We've discovered that your experience wasn't isolated. We found at least 12 other cases of discrimination at that dealership over the past 5 years." Thomas felt his stomach drop. He had hoped his case was just one bad employee having a terrible day, but the reality was much more disturbing. Janet explained that her investigation had uncovered a pattern of discrimination that went far beyond Robert Sterling. The breakthrough came when a former employee of Premium Aircraft Sales reached out to Janet after seeing Thomas's story on the news. The employee, who had quit the company 6 months earlier, was willing to speak on camera about what he had witnessed during his time there. His name was Kevin Rodriguez, and he had worked in the service department for 3 years. Kevin was disgusted by what he had seen and was ready to tell the truth, even though it might hurt his chances of finding another job in the aviation industry. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," Kevin told Janet during their interview. "What happened to that farmer wasn't unusual. I saw it happen over and over again. They had their own way of deciding who was a real customer and who wasn't." Kevin revealed that there were unofficial company practices designed to discourage certain customers from making purchases. Sales staff were trained to make the buying process difficult and uncomfortable for people they deemed undesirable. This included excessive paperwork requirements, invasive financial questioning, and deliberate delays in service. Even more shocking, Kevin had copies of internal company emails that he had saved before quitting. These emails contained jokes and comments from management and sales staff about minority customers. Some of the language was so offensive that the news station couldn't air it without heavy editing. One email from Sterling to another manager read, "Had another one of those customers today trying to look at the expensive jets. Wasted 2 hours of my time before I convinced him he was shopping above his pay grade." The email was sent just 2 days after Guy Thomas's visit. Another email showed Sterling bragging to colleagues about his techniques for getting rid of problem customers. He described how asking for multiple forms of identification and questioning the authenticity of financial documents usually made people uncomfortable enough to leave. Janet's investigation also revealed that Premium Aircraft Sales had been sued twice before for discrimination, but both cases had been settled out of court with confidentiality agreements. The company had paid substantial settlements to make the problems go away without admitting wrongdoing. When Janet contacted these previous victims, they were initially reluctant to speak because of their legal agreements. However, after consulting with lawyers, 2 of them agreed to share their stories on condition of anonymity. One victim was a successful doctor who had been treated almost exactly like Thomas. Despite having pre-approved financing and a spotless credit history, he was questioned extensively about the source of his money and eventually told that the aircraft he wanted wasn't available, even though it was clearly displayed on the showroom floor. Another victim was a Latino businessman who owned several restaurants. He described being followed around the showroom by security guards and having his identification photocopied multiple times. When he complained about the treatment, he was told it was standard procedure, even though white customers weren't subjected to the same requirements. The most damaging evidence came from security camera footage that Kevin had managed to save before leaving the company. The footage showed clear differences in how customers were treated based on their race. White customers were greeted immediately, offered refreshments, and given detailed tours of aircraft. Minority customers were often left waiting, treated with suspicion, and given minimal attention. Janet's investigation expanded beyond just Premium Aircraft Sales. She discovered that discrimination in luxury retail was more common than most people realized. She interviewed experts who explained that many high-end businesses had informal policies designed to discourage customers who didn't fit their preferred demographic. Dr. Angela Foster, a sociology professor who studied consumer discrimination, explained the psychology behind these practices. "Many luxury retailers operate on assumptions about who their ideal customer looks like," she said. "They make snap judgments based on appearance, race, and perceived social class, often missing out on legitimate customers who have significant purchasing power." The story gained national attention when a major television network picked up Janet's investigation. The segment aired during prime time and reached millions of viewers across the country. Social media exploded with reactions, and Premium Aircraft scandal began trending on multiple platforms. Thomas watched the national broadcast from his living room, surrounded by Patricia and their 2 adult children who had driven in from Atlanta to support their father. Seeing the evidence laid out so clearly was both validating and heartbreaking. Thomas realized that his humiliation had been part of a deliberate system designed to exclude people like him. "I can't believe this was happening to so many people," Thomas said to his family. "How did they get away with it for so long?" The public reaction was swift and powerful. Customers began canceling orders with premium aircraft sales, and several major aircraft manufacturers announced they were reviewing their dealer agreements with the company. Protesters gathered outside the dealership, carrying signs that read, "Respect all customers" and "Money has no color." The story resonated particularly strongly in the Black community, where many successful professionals shared their own experiences of discrimination in high-end retail settings. Social media filled with stories of Black doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and athletes who had faced similar treatment when trying to make major purchases. Professional organizations began speaking out as well. The National Black Chamber of Commerce issued a statement condemning the practices at premium aircraft sales and calling for industry-wide changes. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association announced they would be reviewing diversity and inclusion practices among their corporate partners. Most surprisingly to Thomas, support came from unexpected places. White customers who had shopped at premium aircraft sales began sharing their own observations about how minority customers were treated differently. Several admitted they had noticed the disparities but hadn't spoken up at the time. One customer, a retired airline pilot named Captain William Hayes, wrote an open letter that was published in several newspapers. He described watching a Black businessman be treated poorly at premium aircraft sales while he received red carpet treatment. "I should have said something," Hayes wrote. "My silence made me complicit in discrimination." The financial impact on premium aircraft sales was immediate and severe. Their stock price dropped by 30% in just 1 week. 3 major manufacturers terminated their dealer agreements, and the company's insurance provider began investigating whether discriminatory practices violated their coverage terms. Robert Sterling was fired within days of the national broadcast, along with 2 other managers who were identified in the leaked emails. The company's CEO, Harold Morrison, was forced to resign after it was revealed that he had been aware of discrimination complaints, but had failed to take meaningful action. Legal experts began predicting that premium aircraft sales faced potential bankruptcy. The company was now facing multiple federal investigations, a class action lawsuit from discriminated customers, and a mass exodus of both customers and employees. Thomas received calls from lawyers across the country wanting to represent him in what was shaping up to be a landmark discrimination case. The evidence was overwhelming, and legal experts predicted that any settlement would be substantial. But for Thomas, the money wasn't the most important thing. As he sat on his porch that evening, looking out over the fields where his journey had begun, he realized that his painful experience had exposed a problem much bigger than one bad day at an aircraft dealership. His willingness to speak up had given a voice to countless others who had suffered in silence. 6 months after Thomas's story first made headlines, he received a phone call that he never expected. It was Harold Morrison, the former CEO of Premium Aircraft Sales, calling from his lawyer's office. Morrison's voice was shaky and filled with what sounded like genuine remorse. "Mr. Johnson, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," Morrison began, "but I needed to call you personally to apologize for what happened at my company. What you experienced was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for creating a culture where that kind of behavior was allowed to happen." Thomas listened carefully as Morrison explained how the federal investigation had revealed the true extent of discrimination at his former company. The Department of Justice had found evidence of systematic bias that went back nearly a decade. Morrison admitted that he had received complaints before but had dismissed them as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. "I realize now that I was willfully blind to what was happening," Morrison said. "I allowed good people like you to be hurt because I was too comfortable with the status quo. I'm calling to ask for your forgiveness not because I deserve it, but because I need you to know that your courage has changed me as a person." The conversation was emotional for Thomas. He had spent months angry at Morrison and everyone connected to premium aircraft sales. But hearing the genuine remorse in the man's voice, Thomas felt something he hadn't expected: compassion. He realized that holding on to anger was only hurting himself. "I appreciate you calling," Thomas told Morrison. "What happened was wrong, but I can hear that you truly understand that now. The important thing is that we make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." By this time, the legal proceedings had moved quickly. Thomas's brother-in-law, David, had assembled a team of top civil rights lawyers who filed a comprehensive lawsuit against premium aircraft sales. The evidence was so overwhelming that the company's lawyers advised settling rather than going to trial. The settlement was substantial, much larger than Thomas had ever imagined. But more important to him were the changes the company was required to make. Premium aircraft sales had to implement comprehensive diversity training for all employees, hire an independent monitor to oversee their practices, and establish a fund to compensate other victims of discrimination. The company also had to publicly acknowledge their discriminatory practices and issue a formal apology to Thomas and all affected customers. This was broadcast during a primetime news special, with Morrison's replacement reading a statement that accepted full responsibility for the company's actions. But the real vindication came when Thomas finally got the call he had been waiting for. Elite Aviation Solutions, premium aircraft sales' biggest competitor, invited Thomas to visit their showroom in Atlanta. The CEO personally guaranteed that Thomas would receive the respectful treatment he deserved. Thomas and Patricia drove to Atlanta on a beautiful Saturday morning. This time, Thomas wore his best suit and arrived in his luxury pickup truck, but he knew that his appearance shouldn't matter. What mattered was that he was being treated as a valued customer. From the moment Thomas walked into Elite Aviation Solutions, the difference was like night and day. The receptionist greeted him warmly by name and immediately called for the general manager. Thomas was offered coffee and given a comfortable place to sit while they prepared for his visit. The sales manager, Catherine Wells, treated Thomas with complete professionalism and respect. She had clearly done her homework, knowing about Thomas's farming operation and understanding exactly what kind of aircraft would meet his needs. She never questioned his ability to afford the plane or asked to see his financial documents multiple times. "Mr. Johnson, we're honored to have you here," Catherine said as she led Thomas and Patricia through the showroom. "We've heard about your successful farming operation, and we want to help you find the perfect aircraft for your business needs." The aircraft Thomas chose was even better than the one he had originally wanted at Premium Aircraft Sales. It was a newer model with more advanced technology and better fuel efficiency. Elite Aviation Solutions offered him an excellent price and threw in additional services like pilot training and maintenance packages. But the best part was how Thomas felt throughout the entire process. He was treated like the successful businessman he was, with dignity and respect. The sales team was genuinely interested in meeting his needs, not judging him based on his appearance or making assumptions about his financial situation. When Thomas signed the purchase agreement, Catherine shook his hand warmly and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Johnson. We're proud to have you as a customer and we look forward to serving you for many years to come." 3 months later, Thomas took delivery of his new aircraft. The moment was captured by several news crews who had followed his story from the beginning. As Thomas walked around his gleaming new jet, he thought about how far he had come from that humiliating day at Premium Aircraft Sales. Patricia stood beside him, tears of pride in her eyes. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered. Thomas nodded, thinking about the man who had taught him that hard work and persistence could overcome any obstacle. The story didn't end with Thomas getting his airplane. The impact of his experience continued to ripple through the aviation industry and beyond. Several other luxury retailers began reviewing their customer service practices, realizing that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was also bad for business. Thomas began receiving invitations to speak at business conferences and diversity workshops. He shared his story not to seek sympathy, but to help other companies understand the importance of treating all customers with respect. His message was simple: judge people by their character and their ability to pay, not by their appearance. Premium Aircraft Sales never recovered from the scandal. The company declared bankruptcy within a year, and their remaining assets were sold to competitors. Robert Sterling was unable to find another job in the aviation industry and eventually moved to another state to start over in a different career. But Thomas wasn't interested in revenge. Instead, he used part of his settlement money to establish the Johnson Foundation for Equal Opportunity. The foundation provided scholarships for young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to pursue careers in aviation, agriculture, or business. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was Kevin Rodriguez's daughter, who wanted to become a pilot. Kevin, the whistleblower who had helped expose the discrimination at premium aircraft sales, had struggled to find work after speaking out. Thomas's foundation not only helped Kevin's daughter achieve her dreams, but also hired Kevin as the foundation's program coordinator. 2 years after buying his jet, Thomas was flying to a business conference in Chicago when he received an unexpected message on his phone. It was from a young black entrepreneur who had just successfully purchased his first aircraft from Elite Aviation Solutions. The young man had seen Thomas's story and credited it with giving him the confidence to pursue his dreams, despite potential obstacles. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for fighting this battle so the rest of us didn't have to," the message read. "Because of your courage, I was treated with respect from day one. Your story changed everything." As Thomas flew over the farmland below, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. What had started as the worst day of his professional life had turned into something much more meaningful. He had not only achieved his dream of owning an aircraft, but he had also helped create a world where other people wouldn't have to face the discrimination he had experienced. The most important lesson Thomas learned was that sometimes the battles we don't want to fight are the ones that matter most. By refusing to stay silent about injustice, he had created positive change that would benefit countless others for generations to come. Today, Thomas continues to run his successful farming operation, now flying his own plane between his various properties. But more importantly, he serves as an inspiration to anyone who has ever been told they don't belong somewhere because of how they look or where they come from. His story proves that dignity, persistence, and the courage to speak truth can overcome even the most entrenched forms of discrimination.